Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. This is an exciting moment for me, and hopefully this becomes an edifying, empowering, and opportunity for us to move forward in some issues that are very important. Late last year, I was able to bring together a group of mental health professionals here in Washington for a briefing on the crisis of suicide afflicting Black youth. The problem of youth suicide across all backgrounds has been in the headlines lately, but the situation among Black children and young adults is especially acute right now, with studies indicating suicide rates for this group have exceeded those of white children, and finding that more than a third of elementary school-age suicides involve Black students. After that initial December briefing, I understood that this wasn't something that we would just watch idly, that the conscience of the Congress, that is the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, needed to act to save these babies. And so with the support of the CBC Chair, Karen Bass, we are here today to launch the CBC's Emergency Taskforce on Youth Suicide and Mental Health. Standing with me today are some of the same professionals who first brought this to our attention, and I am counting on them to tell you more about the crisis. What I want to lay out is what we hope to accomplish and how we plan to get there. First, this task force is both urgent and mission-driven. I hope that it will complete its work no later than early next year and dissolve thereafter. It is an emergency task force dedicated to bringing public awareness to the crisis and developing concrete solutions to end it. In an effort to engage experts in the space, we have convened a working group approximately of 20 professionals, led by Dr. Michael Lindsey of the McSilver Institute of Poverty Policy and Research at NYU. With their help, we will have several events like the one following this press conference over the next few months in order to educate members of Congress and their staffs about the perilous mental health of Black youth. We will also seek to host events nationwide to engage the community leaders who can be the first responders for our youth and prevent more deaths. Finally, we will develop a report that outlines concrete steps for Congress to take a stop to this trend. I am tremendously grateful to Chairman Bass for her help in making this happen and her shared recognition of this crisis, and equally grateful to the leaders of our task force for their insight and desire to work with us on this. With that, I'd like to turn it over to my friend Karen Bass, the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by thanking Congresswoman Coleman. It is her leadership that brought this issue to the attention of the Congressional Black Caucus, and all of us were happy to stand up in support of her and to do whatever is needed to address this problem. We can no longer stand aside and watch as the youth in our community continue to struggle with depressions, traumatic stress, or anxiety. Far too often, the pain African Americans experience is either overlooked or dismissed. That has to end today. The idea that we are even here talking about suicide amongst children is just shocking. There was a recent report of a boy, he was not a young man, who committed suicide when he was being bullied because he was, I'm sorry? Nigel Sheldon. Because he was gay, and he was how old? 15. I mean, it's just, and knowing that some of the children who are taking their own lives are of elementary school age. So under Representative Coleman's leadership, the CBC will work to address the social and economic factors that have led to this crisis. We'll also partner with experts and parents to educate our communities about the warning signs associated with suicide. As chair of the CBC, I look forward to working with my colleagues on this task force so that we can change the staggering suicide statistic and remain committed to saving the lives of our youth. Just as other members of the Congressional Black Caucus are addressing maternal death and childhood suicide should not be problems that we're even discussing. So thank you so much for your leadership.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you. I'd like to take a moment just to introduce members of the task force that have made it here. Congresswoman Bernice Johnson from Texas, Congressman Emanuel Cleaver from Kansas, and Congresswoman Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, and of course, along with us, you'll meet the others as we go through this. I want to thank Karen, and I want to now ask Dr. Michael Lindsey, Executive Director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at NYU, to address the platform.
Thank you, Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman, Representative Karen Bass, and to all distinguished members of Congress, particularly those of the Congressional Black Caucus, who have recognized that we have an emergency and that we are facing a crisis with respect to our Black children. Thank you for deciding that it is time to ring the alarm. We'd also like to thank the working group members, as was mentioned, who have been with us throughout this journey and brought us to this day. So Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble, Dr. William B. Lawson, thank you. Also joining us today, Dr. Sherry Molock and David Johns, who will join us in a panel discussion. Thank you both. Let me tell you why this is an urgent matter. At the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research at NYU, we spend a lot of time and energy studying the mental health of Black children and adolescents, as well as interventions and resources they need to thrive at home and in school. In the course of that research, we've come to identify some alarming trends, particularly for Black boys between the ages of 5 and 12. And this was first noted by epidemiologist Jeffrey Bridge and his colleagues. Black children have a suicide rate that is twice as high as white children. And furthermore, the rates have doubled over the past generation. This is a national crisis, folks. We must act now to identify the reasons for this and to determine what resources are required to save our children. We must act in the memory of 10-year-old Seven Bridges from Louisville, Kentucky, who completed suicide in January of this year. Stormaya Denson Jackson of Washington, D.C., 9-year-old Mackenzie Adams of Linden, Alabama, all who have ended their lives before they have barely begun. And we must act in the memory of 11-year-old Rylan Hagan of Washington, D.C., whose story personally touched me, and I've actually been in contact with his mother, who asked me, what is being done? And she poignantly asked me, can you help me to understand why I came home to find my 11-year-old son hanging from his bed? Throughout the rest of the year, our working group will be developing a report that we'll present to the task force. The report will help the task force members and the nation to understand what is causing the increase in suicides by Black children, how to identify suicidal behavior, and what steps we recommend to reverse this trend. Meanwhile, we do know the following. We need targeted resources to study why the suicide rate is rising in Black children and other at-risk groups. We also need resources to take those findings and develop evidence-based interventions that will address the mental health needs of our youth. Furthermore, schools are the primary provider of mental health services in our country. Therefore, we believe, and I hope you don't mind me speaking for this group, that every school in this nation needs a mental health provider, every school. And the number of providers should be proportionate to the number of kids in that school. Yet we often see 2 or 3 schools sharing a single provider, and that provider may be in school Tuesday. What happens on Wednesday, Thursday, Friday when kids are presenting with mental health crises? So with that being said, we're going to do the work. And we thank the Congresswoman, we thank the Congressional Black Caucus for empowering us to do this great work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsey. I'd like to advise you that David Johns is here with us. He's a tall guy on the end there, and he is the Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition or something. I get those C's mixed up down here. I'd also now like to invite another member of our task force, Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble, CEO of the Acoma Project and Center to
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to be brief because I know we do not have a lot of time. What I'll share with you is that my research career began with a That vision is, quote, to ameliorate the difficulties faced by Black, African American, and other youth of color who disproportionately suffer from the effects of unequal opportunities to achieve the healthiest versions of themselves. Envision, if you will, two children, one Black, African American, the other white, each born into loving and economically stable families. From the time these young people are conceived and through the emerging stages of adulthood, they are exposed to different levels of health risk with differing impacts. For example, across socioeconomic strata, disparities persist related to infant birth weight, as has been mentioned, mortality, and maternal stress. As a mom, I can attest to that. After birth and into childhood, disparities emerge and persist related to compulsory K-12 education and social services. For example, African American children are as much as 5 times more likely to be expelled from school for a minor infraction as their white peers, and as much as 25 to 50%, I would say even more, less likely to receive adequate mental health services, evidence-based or not, when faced with a diagnosable mental illness. Researchers like myself, my colleagues, clinicians, and policymakers describe these differences as disparities and identify Black and African American youth as members of an underserved disparities population. As a Black woman and a mother, I am all too aware of these realities, and as an academic researcher, I address these realities by asserting that such disparities should never exist in a country with the bounty of resources, knowledge, and technological advances such as we have in the U.S. I've therefore dedicated my academic career of the last 20 years to illuminating the factors that contribute to mental health disparities for African Americans and to collaborating with our community and people of color overall to create solutions building on the strengths and resilience inherent to our communities. It's my distinct honor to participate on this working group supporting our chair, Dr. Lindsey, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, and the Congressional Black Caucus Taskforce, including Representative Bass's leadership, a group comprised of luminaries, truly, of public service working side by side with African American and Black luminaries of the biomedical research, policy, and educational spheres. I'm here to validate the dire mental health needs of African American youth and witness to the incredible resilience of Black people, our children, families, and communities. One of my main goals is for our work to center the voices of Black teens themselves, and my call is for us to convene Black teens of varied backgrounds to share their experiences with us, as I have done with the Coleman Project Research Lab since 1999. In closing, I wish to amplify the grave need for more research conducted in the words of those, I won't date myself, Damon John from the famous clothing company FUBU, to support the Black and African American clinical investigators in securing the levels of funding needed from our tax-supported federal funding agencies. In achieving these goals, my aim is to build and fortify the pipeline to optimal mental health for all Black, African American, and youth of color, and to ensure and support that this work includes investigations done for us and by us. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alfie. The work that this task force seeks to do is tremendously important, and we look forward to seeing it through. With that, we'll take a few questions if you have any from the press. If not, we'd like to get on with the panel discussion. Good, let's get on with it.
There are some seats on the other side of the room, maybe just to take that trip across now.
have a slight technical glitch to be straightened out in a moment. Okay, here we go. I want to start this by thanking each and every one of you for joining us here today. I particularly want to thank this very illustrious panel of scholars, academics, medical practitioners, activists. All of you represent an important function in our communities, and bridging our social issues with our cultural and spiritual issues as well. I thank you. And this is not the first group setting out to support Black youth. I'm proud to co-chair the Caucus on Black women and girls. And I'm also proud that a member of our task force, Mr. Danny Davis, is a co-chair of the Congressional Caucus on Black men and boys. And so this is a coming together of all of us for this particular issue. But this is the first and only group whose mission is so specific and critical. The crisis of youth suicide across all ages has been in the headlines lately, but the situation among Black children and young adults is especially acute. Last year, the journal, the American Medical Association Pediatrics, published a report that found that for the first time in the history of such research, the rate of suicides for Black children between the ages of 5 and 12 has exceeded that of white children. That is a very notable piece of data right there when you consider the population. The same report found that more than a third of elementary school age suicides involve Black children. High-profile cases like the deaths of Mackenzie Nicole Adams and more recently Nigel Shelby demonstrate how difficult it is to categorize the circumstances that are taking our children's lives. There are elements of race, of trauma, of socioeconomic status, of sexual orientation and gender identity, and many more issues at play. For any solution to be effective, it will need to be holistic. Today we begin the work of identifying the causes for this crisis and how to formulate these solutions. This task force is both urgent and mission-driven. Hope that it will complete its work no later than the early next year, as I said, and it will dissolve thereafter. It is an emergency task force dedicated to bringing public awarenesses to the status of mental health and mental health care among Black youth, and developing concrete solutions to halt and lower rising suicide rates for the population. Over the next several months, in addition to the events like the one we're having here in Washington, we hope to bring what we learn to communities across the country, connecting parents and other community leaders to the knowledge and tools to be the first responders that identify at-risk and students that are at risk and get them the help that they need. With the help of the newly assembled working group, including the individuals joining us today, we will also work to assemble a report, hopefully by the end of this year, detailing the concrete congressional steps that will prevent more tragic deaths. The urgency and importance of this discussion cannot be understated. And we are so blessed to be able to stand here today and have this opportunity. Dr. Lindsey currently serves as the Executive Director of the McSilver Institute for Poverty Policy and Research, and Constance and Martin Silver Professor of Poverty Studies at New York University. His expertise includes child and adolescent mental health services, research, adolescent depression, risk behaviors, school mental health, and special interest in the factors that prevent adolescents from receiving the mental health care that they needed. He is distinguished and he has been awarded. I will not read the rest of this new biography. Dr. Alfie Breland-Noble serves as the project director of the African American Knowledge Optimized for Mindfully Healthy Adolescents, COMA. She's an expert in the field of adolescent depression disparities and has been appointed to the American Psychological Association Board to develop depression treatment guidelines. And she currently does research with the Division of the Department of Psychiatry at Georgetown University Medical Center. Dr. William B. Lawson is a consultant for the Institute for Reducing Disparities through Research, Education, and Access to Care. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland School of Medicine and professor emeritus and former associate dean of disparities at Dell Medical School at the University of Texas, Austin. Dr. Sherry Davis Molock is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology at the George Washington University, conducting research on the prevention of suicide and HIV in American adolescents and young adults. She was recently awarded a pilot grant from the DC Center for AIDS Research to develop an HIV/AIDS testing and mental health intervention for youth in African American churches. She currently serves on the steering committee of the Suicide Prevention Research Center. She is a co-pastor and she believes in commingling, I should say, our cultural, our spiritual, and our mental and physical health. Finally, we have with us David Jones, someone with whom I have worked many times. He is the Executive Director of the National Black Justice Coalition and a doctoral student at the Teachers College of Columbia University. The mission of the National Black Justice Coalition is a civil rights organization dedicated to the empowerment of the LGBTQ people, including people living with HIV/AIDS, is to end racism, homophobia, and LGBTQ bias and stigma. He's a recognized thought leader and social justice champion. I think we have an outstanding panel, and I would like to give you an opportunity, if you don't mind, to take 2.5 minutes for an opening statement. Thank you very much. We'll start with you, Dr. Lindsey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman again. Just a few things I want to point out to our group here. One child under the age of 13 dies of suicide almost every 5 days in the United States. Between 1999 and 2015, 1,300 kids between the ages of 5 and 12 died by suicide. 76% of those kids were male. We just recently completed some analyses at the McSilver Institute, which included studying suicide rates among U.S. youth, high school age youth, from 1991 through 2017. And what we found is that for every racial group, suicide attempts have gone down among adolescents, except for Black adolescents. Suicide attempts for every other group have gone down except for Black adolescents. Suicide attempts are going up. Suicide is the third leading cause of death among Black children in the United States between the ages of 10 and 19. Some of the things that we find that are associated with suicide risk include poverty, trauma experiences, and incarcerated youth die by suicide at a rate of 2 to 3 times higher than youth in the general population. Some of the risk factors may include depression, anxiety, bullying and teasing, as we heard about, racial discrimination. But we've also done some research at the McSilver Institute that is starting to identify that suicide may be an impulsive behavior for Black adolescents. That what's really alarming is that we may not see precursor depression, trauma, those kinds of experiences, that they may be more impulsive in terms of their engagement in suicidal behaviors. We're starting to see that. Also want to point out that among sexual minority youth, in terms of suicide, what we see is that, particularly in 2017, data from the CDC, we've analyzed that if a youth who identifies as being heterosexual but reports to have a same-sex intimate relationship in the past year, their suicide rates are higher, almost 5 to 6 times higher than any other group. So these findings bring us to this point of needing an emergency task force. We see that the emergency task force can do a number of things, including including public education, campaigns on the signs and symptoms, so that those who work in proximity and close with youth, Black youth, are aware of the signs and symptoms. And also, as I mentioned earlier, that every school should have a mental health provider, and that should be proportionate to the number of kids in the school. So we conclude with offering our recommendation for prioritizing funding on the positive youth development of kids, including after-school programming and mentoring programs.
Thank you, Doctor. Doctor? Yes, thank you. So I will not speak to everything that my colleague just shared, but I will raise a couple of points. And these are issues that I feel are critical needs for this work. There are 5 of them. There were 6, but my colleague mentioned 1, so I will skip that one. I think first, in addressing this issue, the idea of raising awareness, I do not say people are ignorant, because I'm talking about my own people. What I say is that people are not necessarily aware. Signs and symptoms are important for people to recognize. Putting these things in context and using a language that resonates with families and communities and with the young people themselves feels like a critical issue. So for me, the first issue is what are the ways in which we can raise awareness about the needs of young people with depression, with anxiety, and young people who may be feeling suicidal. Along those lines, it's important for me to mention the names that come to me in thinking about people who and families who have struggled with these issues. And the first one is a young man by the name of Torian Leon Graves, who is the child of a dear friend of mine who died by suicide at the age of 15. Also is a young man named Stephen Rose, who died by suicide a few years ago in 2014 as a young adult. And so it's important to, as I've heard other colleagues say, to say their names so that we recognize there are people tied to these issues. Second, I say is a critical need is skills. Helping our young people develop coping skills is critical to me. Helping families and helping youth of all ages, whether they're little babies, whether they're teenagers, young adults, helping them understand and identify what they need to be able to support themselves and their mental health on a day-to-day basis, given the unique stressors that Black young people face. Racism, discrimination, or our other marginalized young people, homophobia, transphobia, sexism among young women. And so helping our young people have these skills, I feel like is critical and will be something that we, within the working group, collaborating with our illustrious panel from the Congressional Black Caucus can do. Third, I would say training and support, not just limited to the early stages, early career stages for early career folks, though that is critical, but throughout the life course, the career course for those of us who do this work, particularly those of us who are researchers, so that we don't, as we say in the field, go off a cliff after that first small grant. The funding piece is vital because the knowledge that we generate from the work that we do informs what happens clinically and it informs policy, and it's very important that our voices, as you well know from forming this group, continue to be at the table. Finally, I think about the arc over the years of where we started and where we've come to in terms of people recognizing the importance of this issue. So I am deeply grateful to you. I don't think any of us can say this enough, but we are deeply grateful to you, Congresswoman Watson Coleman, for raising this issue, and to the members of the Congressional Black Caucus for supporting them in this effort. And finally, what's important to me is identifying and recognizing and acknowledging community-based solutions. What do Black people already know that can support us? What do we already know that can help us? So thinking through things like practice-based evidence and what are people already doing. And in closing, I will acknowledge 2 more young people, Charlotte and Hannah, who developed 2 teenagers, beautiful Black teenagers who developed something called the Not Okay app, thinking about community-based solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Very, 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 very pleased to be invited to discuss this very important issue as a person who, for much of my career, have been focused on academics and looking at the out end in terms of doing research. It's important to me to understand why we have not devoted the resources to try to address these kinds of problems. Just participated in a number of major studies looking at the role of depression as a risk factor for suicide, and only recently have we recognized that the tremendous amount of money that was spent in terms of looking at the genetics of depression was not all that useful. What we now know is that depression probably is not a genetic disease. Similarly, we've known for a long time that post-traumatic stress disorder, another risk factor, was determined by social determinants of health as well. So we need to reshift our priorities in terms of shifting research meaningful and has some usefulness for our folks. Now, I've been now working in the correctional system and have always been amazed at how we continue to look at our children, our youth, as when they do behaviors that are not consistent with social norms, they're considered bad, whereas our kids are not considered bad. They are folks in terms of treatment. We find that African American youth, all the way through at kindergarten, all the way to the prison system, are put into punitive systems, more likely to be spanked, more likely to be corporal punishment, more likely to terminated from school than suspended, more likely to be frisked and searched, and as we all know, more likely to be incarcerated. This message gives you a sense that their lives may not be that valuable. More importantly, when they get stuck into the correctional system, it's a dead end. It creates a vicious cycle in which they do not have the opportunity to do things like develop their full potential, go to school, and so forth. And we now recognize, unfortunately, that the correctional system has become the place in which we provide treatment services for people with mental disorders and for substance abuse. Unfortunately, many of our youth recognize that these opportunities to treat these disorders do not exist, and so what they do, self-treat themselves. They have PTSD, they have depression, they use drugs of abuse. They have problems and stresses in life. Unfortunately, they either attack each other or they commit suicide. Putting all these things together, we need to change not only the perspective, but also the recognition that there is a link between the drug abuse crises that we're having now, suicide, as well as the correctional problem. And then I want to note that in terms of the availability of treatments that we have, I've spent my career impressed that we've developed new and effective treatments for problems like PTSD, like depression, but at the same time, African American youth do not get these treatments. We have a number of barriers to making sure that the advances that we made in neurosciences, neuropsychology, neurochemistry, does not filter into our community. We often are reluctant to participate in the clinical trials and studies to do it because of the historical role that this country has played in terms of using these trials, not necessarily to help other people, but at the same time to help the larger population at the expense of our people. I'm very, very glad to see this kind of approach being taken by the Congressional Black Caucus, because I think that this is an excellent opportunity to change a trajectory that has led to negative consequences for our African American community.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson. Dr. Molock.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I first of all also want to echo my colleagues in thanking Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, the Congressional Black Caucus, for convening this important task force and the working group that is accompanying it. In the 25 years that I've been doing research, to my knowledge, I've never seen this done, so this is like a breath of fresh air for all of us who've been doing this a long time. As some of my esteemed colleagues already noted, suicide is the third leading cause of death for African American youth, and I'll be confining most of my remarks to 15 to 24-year-olds because that's the group that I work with. And the tragedy of that is that that statistic has not changed in the 25 years that I've been doing this research. And the other tragedy about that is that the three leading causes of death for Black youth, which are homicides, accidents, and suicides, are all preventable. So we should be angry, and we should not tolerate the fact that the three leading causes of death for young people, our future, are things that we can prevent. It's also important to understand that African American community has a disproportionate burden when it comes to suicide deaths because we are a younger community relative to other communities. So for example, the median age in the Black community is 33, it's 43 for white people. Most of the people who are in the white community are baby boomers, but most of the people in the Black community are millennials. So that means that the rates of death affect us differently than they do other communities. I don't want to go over the risk factors again because my colleagues have done that, but I do want to echo something that Dr. Breland-Noble noted, which is that it's important when we think about doing these types of interventions and prevention programs that we focus not just on risk factors but also protective factors, because it's the protective factors that help us particularly preventing suicide. One of the most important things that we can do for young people is give them a sense of connectedness, whether that be in school, in our faith communities, whether that be in community organizations, is so important. It's also important to note, as I'm sure everyone's going to say today, that the group that is particularly at risk in the African American community, and not just youth, are members of the LGBT community. And so we have to also own up to our role in the stigma that's associated with being a member of that community, and also own up to the fact that we don't always embrace that aspect of our community is really important. Last but not least, I would like to encourage the working group who is assembled here, who we are here to be your eyes, your ears, your arms, and your legs. As we have, I think this is an all-star team, present company excluded, of course. But it is my hope and my prayer in the months ahead that when the real work begins, that we will focus on short and long-term goals. That we will not just focus on low-hanging fruit, which is easy for us to then pat ourselves on the back and think we've done a good job. These are very complex problems. Let's not have an either-or game going on where we either focus on environmental factors or biological factors, or we either focus on treatment or prevention, or we either focus on 5 to 12-year-olds or 15 to 19-year-olds, because all of it's important, and we need a holistic, comprehensive approach to this. The last thing I'm going to encourage again is that we please consider working with community organizations, as Dr. Breland noted as well. We can't do this by ourselves. It will definitely take a village. And there are lots of people with lots of good ideas in the community that we need to borrow from. There are some folks who know how to save a child, and we don't talk to them. We also need to talk to the youth themselves. If we build a clinic on every corner and we put a clinic in every school, if we don't change the stigma associated with mental health treatment and seeking help, it won't matter. So part of that is us talking to young people about what can we do to change the stigma associated with mental health treatment, the stigma associated with help-seeking behaviors, and for us to change community norms about what we think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jones.
Yes, ma'am. Before I read a shorter version of the remarks, formal remarks I submitted, I just want to thank each of you, the members of the CBC, for continuing to be the conscience of our country and the defenders of our democracy. And I also want to acknowledge that it is often the case that we have conversations about the Black community and then include those of us who have other marginal and intersectional identities. So I want to thank both my colleagues and you for your leadership in ensuring that we start the foundation, ensuring that all means all. I'm humbled to be on this panel and to lead the work of the National Black Justice Coalition, the nation's only civil rights organization that is both intentional and unapologetic in acknowledging the intersections of racial justice and LGBTQ, the same gender-loving equality. I, like each of you, care deeply about our students. And beyond caring about our students, I also take the time to listen to them. In my conversations with students and through my academic research, it has become clear that while many of us can recall a childhood filled with joy, for students who are Black and LGBTQ and same gender loving, schools can be terrifying and hostile spaces. LGBTQ SGL youth experience violence and bullying nearly twice as much as youth who are presumed to be heterosexual. Nearly 80% of LGBTQ SGL teens report feeling depressed. And LGBTQ SGL students are 5 times more likely to attempt suicide as their heterosexual peers, as my colleague Michael noted. Imagine being a racial and sexual minority student in public schools today. There's active legislation attempting to determine which bathrooms transgender students can use. And students do not feel safe and affirmed, cannot be expected to demonstrate what they know and have learned. We know what happens when our babies do not feel safe and are not supported. On April 18th, I learned about one of my brothers, Nigel Shelby, a 15-year-old Black boy who died by suicide after being bullied and harassed at school for being gay. Shortly after I learned about Nigel, I was contacted by a student who said that they recently contemplated suicide after being jumped in a bathroom by peers who told them that they are a faggot who deserve to die. And I cried. I'm talking a heart-heavy, cheek-burning, struggling to catch your breath cry. I cried because I thought about Nigel Shelby and Jamel Miles and Carl Joseph Walker Hoover. Jamel Miles died of suicide following reports of anti-gay bullying after coming out at school. He was 9 years old. Carl Joseph Walker Hoover is a 6th grader who liked to read and play football. He was bullied for being gay and died by suicide. I also cried thinking about Mackenzie Adams, a 9-year-old beautiful and brilliant black girl who died by suicide after racist bullying taunts of kill yourself. Mackenzie reminds us that it is not just our boys who are struggling with the consequences of adults failing to act. All of the data tells us that hate crimes are on the rise and that bullying is rampant, but too often we push past these statistics and ignore the stories of the children behind them. Black children deserve to grow up too, all of them. The fact that I have to say this makes my stomach turn and my heart race. But we must also do the work required to end bullying, harassment, and abuse in schools. Recommendations to do this include passing federal legislation like the Equality Act to ensure that there are clear and consistent civil and legal protections provided to people based on sexual identity and gender orientation. States like Alabama that lack anti-bullying legislation should pass research-informed policy and support lasting implementation. We need more mental health professionals and school counselors who understand child development, are equipped to provide culturally competent care, and are able to properly address issues of bias and bullying. In far too many schools across this country, security officers outnumber school counselors. Schools and school districts should provide culturally competent training that acknowledges intersectionality to anyone with the ability to nourish Black childhood, create safe space, or catch our babies when they need a safe place to land. And teachers and school leaders must be aware of and possess the language and skills needed to support the mental health of all students. The National Black Justice Coalition is proud of our work to equip caring and concerned adults with the support needed to better meet the needs of all students, but especially Black LGBTQ students who are most likely neglected and ignored. We offer ourselves as a resource. On behalf of our babies, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this record and participate in both this conversation and the work that will follow.
Thank you, David. I think I would like to yield to Eddie Bernice Johnson for questions first.
First, let me say thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership, and thanks to all of you who are here. Before I ran for office, I was a mental health professional, and it's been in my makeup all of my days. And I've tried all kinds of programs to approach the various issues, none of which obviously have worked that well, because we sit here today with really a crisis before us. I would like to ask the panel if there are any tried, imagined, or planned ways in which we could concretely, as a group, address the problem in 1, 2, 3 type fashions. I have programs at home that deal with anti-bullying, anti-crime, working with gangs, and yet my paper, April 11th this year, talks about young Black and Latino men committing suicide in Texas is on the rise. He's not crazy, he is hurting, as a subtitle. I've worked for improving mental health care throughout my state and my local area over the years. And somehow you get to a point where you wonder if anything is working, or is there anything we can do to make it work. At a time like these, when we as people in this body struggle every day for the plead for bare essentials for people to make it, trying to save food stamps and all that, we're having all the rest of these problems too. And we cannot ignore them, and we don't want to ignore them. It's clear that we are interested, but we're at a loss as to where we truly go from here. If you and the research in this task force have come up with some concrete recommendations, I can guarantee you that the Congressional Black Caucus will try very hard to see if we can't get them implemented. As a matter of fact, we can probably incorporate them in our major package for this term that we're putting together now.
It also pertains to addressing suicide ideation among Black adolescents. But I think Alfie said it best earlier. We also, as part of that work, do stigma reduction work. And we work with the adolescent and their families to help normalize, to the extent possible, how effective treatment can be and the use of treatment. We find in our work that that's a huge issue. I think that's been presented earlier by members of the panel here. And so we do know how to do the work. I think a lot of times, as has been said, it's a matter of funding that work and allowing us to do it at scale. Those of us who are on the front lines doing this kind of research. I also want to just say that I think churches are incredibly important. In New York City, we have a great example of a church, First Corinthian Baptist Church. Pastor Mike Warren, who has a freestanding mental health clinic that's free to the parishioners, free to the community. I think we need more models like that. And finally, I'll say that in schools, along with the anti-bullying campaigns that folks have talked about, one of the things that we need to do is socialize the importance of help seeking, as well as socializing for boys that it's okay to cry, it's okay to express your emotion. Oftentimes we find that, particularly some of the families I've interviewed who've had a son completed suicide, there's been a great reticence for that young man by the parents' report to cry, and seemed like there was blunted emotional expression that was not allowed to be conveyed, and that pain turned inward with that person engaging in suicide to the point of completing it.
I would also, Congresswoman, that's a great question, so thank you for that question. I want to echo about the faith communities. I wear two hats. I'm a pastor, co-pastor of a church. And I think one of the things that our church has done, which has worked really beautifully, is working on norm changing, this normalizing mental health conversations. So we have, July is Minority Mental Health Month. During Minority Mental Health Month, we literally have people in the church who either themselves are experiencing mental health challenges or know a family member, and they tell their story. Probably the most poignant one, I want to start crying, was when my daughter talked about being depressed. She was 15. Because of her testimony, in fact, she's actually made that testimony to here in Congress when she was 15. But because of her testimony, people started talking more openly about that. And she just told her story. She was bullied also in school, talked about how hard that was for her, talked about the importance of counseling. We put information in our church bulletin every week about the suicide hotline. Most of my sermons have some kind of mental health aspect in them. And people will sometimes say to me, well, that's because I have this dual discipline. People who do sermons know that we research everything. If you can research something about, I did a sermon about the wall. I know nothing about the wall till I researched that. So it's just researching something else. Developing partnerships with mental health professionals. And even with that, doing it in a way that's creative, because there's so much stigma associated with mental health challenges that if you have a health fair with mental health attached to it, people aren't going to come. So do it another way. Build it into a ministry that's already a standing ministry that's there. So our youth in our church, we have something called Freedom Thinkers, where they have their own Bible study and their own Sunday school, and they talk about whatever they want to talk about. Adults, other than the adult leader, are not allowed to participate in those discussions, and they're confidential. And so we've had kids come out in those meetings. We've had kids talk about the concerns that they have on their heart, and there's a person that's always available for them. So I think there are definitely things that you can do in the faith-based community. As Dr. Lindsey said, there are evidence-based programs that work for youth. One is called Sources of Strength. It's been used in multiple communities. The issue is, how do you scale that up? And we need resources to do that. In my own church, we can do stuff because I'm there and I'm not costing them anything. But how do we do this in multiple churches? We need funds to do that. We need resources to do that.
If I might add, I want to acknowledge that my first boss in Congress, Congresswoman Bernice, would often say, it's interesting that whenever we talk about funding things for the mental health of our communities or to support our babies, there's never any money to do it, but whenever we talk about going to war, there's never a question of how we're going to fund it. I just want to say that to underscore the fact that We know so much about what works for our kids. We also know that it's because we haven't made those investments that we are having this conversation. So to build upon the foundation of my colleagues, there are two things that are really important for me. Before leading NBJC, I had the pleasure of being the executive director for the White House Initiative on Educational Excellence for African Americans, as some of you know, under the leadership of still my president, Barack Hussein Obama. And the thing that mattered most in that context was student-centered summits, where they were enrolled in the process of being experts in determining the recommendations, both policy and practice. And what we found in allowing them to identify the things that matter most is that, one, when we often talk about anti-bullying policies, those are things designed for white kids. They don't speak to intersectionality. They don't acknowledge the nuances of being in black churches or being shaped by black organizations. And in fact, they erase complete parts of our identity. And so a part of what we need to do is be investing in culturally inclusive and culturally competent professional development for all frontline providers. That's teachers, school leaders, social workers, counselors. Every adult that shows up in spaces that kids are forced to move through should understand child development, should appreciate intersectionality, and should also be able to name things like white supremacy and anti-blackness and how they affect our babies in schools. The second thing, as has also been mentioned by my colleagues, is reframing how it is that we even have these conversations. So one of my colleagues just used the term coming out. I like to think if straight people don't have to come out, then gay people don't have to either. And so often we use language like inviting in, which demonstrates that if you do the work to become competent, then we might invite you into something that you otherwise aren't privy to. The last thing is that there are examples of the power of public demonstration of the fact that all people matter. And so one thing, a story that I didn't get to tell, but I want to lift up, is that of Gabrielle Union and her husband, Dwayne Wade, who just a couple of weeks ago made national news by loving on their son, a black boy who the world believes is gay. And the politics of our fascination with young kids, sexual identity, and gender orientation deserves a whole nother panel discussion. But them loving on this boy publicly was disruptive in ways that too many of our babies don't get to experience. And so the lessons to be applied in classrooms are that teachers, staff, and administrators can partner with parents and families, including those not defined by blood or law, to ensure that all students feel safe and supported and included in our classrooms and the school's community. Similarly, schools and communities can work better to celebrate diverse histories and experiences, so all of our students feel seen and have space to explore and express the fullness of who they are. Too often these things don't happen until similar moments like Black History Month, or Women's History Month, or in June when nobody's in school, when people want to talk about Pride Month. And so we can take advantage of opportunities to do this work throughout the school year, and often in ways that don't require us to make any additional investments of money.
Without repeating too much of what our colleagues have already said, I just want to emphasize that I'm impressed the recognition of the role of resistance, and I'll put it what it is. It is resistance. When I was in medical school, I was told that black people didn't get depressed, and we didn't commit suicide. It's in the textbooks. It was widely believed. So we need to have a major campaign cutting across all disciplines, as Alfie said, to deal with this. This campaign has to be stakeholders in every division, every profession, to recognize that suicide is a problem. It is an illness to be treated. It is not, as my minister said, a moral sense sending you to hell. It is an opportunity for folks who are calling for help to get the treatment that they need. In addition to developing a campaign, involve prominent people who themselves have lost loved ones and others to suicide, which is not an easy task. I mean, Dr. Barnes here, whose son committed suicide, has been working for years in terms of trying to get some of these prominent people to come out. They do it very reluctantly, but we need to let them know that going out, acknowledging the importance of suicide is just as important as acknowledging the importance of the other problems in our community, including generating wealth and also playing great sports, so forth and so on. And then we have a technology, we have screening instruments that can pretty good in terms of predicting suicide risk, but we don't use them. And when we use them, we don't do anything with them. Every first responder, when I say first responder, talking about in addition to churches, the barbershops, the every drug abuse program, every prison should have a screen to screen for suicide risk, and then have a mechanism to be able to do something when we get these results. When I was chief at the VA center, we required that all the veterans came in and took a test and checked to see whether they had suicide risk. And what we found was that we got some great results in showing that there was a lot of folks that had suicide risk, but the providers did absolutely nothing with the information. So we need to have mandated recommendations in terms of being able to take action when suicide risk is identified.
I want to thank everybody. I also want to tell you that we're scheduled to end this at 5, and we can get into a discussion that could be 5 a.m., which would be wonderful. I've got a gazillion questions myself, but I'm going to yield to my colleagues because Barbara Lee has joined us from California. Jahana has joined us from Connecticut. Bernice Johnson has to leave to go to her committee meeting. Barbara and I both have to go to the same committee meeting to mark up an appropriations bill. So I'm going to yield to her. And if I have a chance, then I'm going to ask questions. And then I'm going to turn it over to the good Reverend Emanuel Cleaver to follow through.
And Ilhan.
Oh, I already introduced Ilhan earlier. I don't forget my sister.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. First of all, for your tremendous leadership and for putting together this task force and for calling us together. This is so important. And a couple of things I want to mention. Like Congresswoman Bernice Johnson, my background is clinical social work. I'm a psychiatric social worker by profession. When I was in graduate school in the 70s, I started my own community mental health center because of the stigma associated with mental health treatment. It was called Community Health Alliance for Education, Growth, and Development. It was Change, Inc. I did that because in my practice, psychoanalytic psychotherapy was fine. That's what I was trained, the skills and techniques I was trained. But with African American young men and women who were struggling just to survive, this may have been a component of mental health treatment, but it wasn't a comprehensive way to make sure that people move forward with their lives and were treated. And the stigma is still with us today. So a couple things I just wanted to ask, because it's very, what is taking place now is very, you would think by now we would have gotten it right, and it is just tragic, and we've got to get it right. And Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman and myself are on the Labor Appropriations Health Subcommittee, and we're working today to try to make sure that we're doing some things that would move us forward. The use of antidepressants with Black young people, the use of those medications then and now were to me maybe every now and then necessary, but not the cure, not the appropriate treatment. And so I wanted to hear what you think about now in 2019, the use of antidepressants for our young Black boys and girls as a way to calm them down, as they say, and help prevent suicidal tendencies and what have you. And then secondly, PTSD, because I know in my community, like in many of our communities, so many of our young people are traumatized behind gun violence. It's taking place everywhere, and I know, I mean, on the brink, these kids who live in these urban war zones. And so are we looking at PTSD and community PTSD and looking at children in these areas and trying to identify them early, recognizing that this trauma is going to play out in possible suicide later? So thank you again very much. Thank you, Congresswoman.
We have Dr. Noble, then Dr. Lawson, please.
Thank you so much. So a couple of things that you raised that really strike me. And I appreciate your background in psychiatric social work. And I think that when I think about antidepressants as a clinician, I think there are two aspects of it. When I talk with patients, I see patients 1 day a week, particularly Black families. All the families I treat are families of color. Either they're interracial families or the families are people of color. And I have found over the arc of my career that antidepressants are helpful. I think the issue is, for those of us in the Black community, convincing people issue is they can be prescribed by colleagues like Dr. Lawson, another colleague here, Dr. Premise, a psychiatrist. The issue is if people are going to take them, and two, are they going to take them consistently? Because there's so much, we know there's stigma attached to mental illness, but I think there's a greater stigma attached to taking medication for mental illness. So in our own work, what we found, talking to teenagers directly, is teenagers will echo things that they hear from their parents and their grandparents and people in their lives. People will say things like, well, those are addictive. I shouldn't have to take a pill to make me happy, right? And so there are ideas that, I won't say misconceptions, but there are ideas that we have in our community that I think are very culturally bound that I would say we want to address before we make finite decisions about whether or not kids should take antidepressants. I do think there's a lower age limit. I would feel uncomfortable prescribing under a certain age or having it prescribed, but I do think they can be useful. That's one. Related to that, and then I'll yield to my colleague, Dr. Lawson, there's this issue of, I feel like there are three pieces to it. There's sort of the knowledge that has to be generated to inform what we do with families in clinic. So there's the knowledge, then there's what we do with it clinically, and then there's how those two things inform policy. And so for me, it starts with the knowledge generation. I cannot identify, and I don't know if any of my colleagues could either, a single, what we call in our field, randomized controlled trial in those big studies that has looked at a large enough sample of Black people that we can say definitively we know how to treat anything related to depression in Black kids. I feel like we have to start there. Why is it so difficult for us to get Black investigators funded to do this work? That's an issue. And so the disparities that we face trying to get the money to generate the knowledge that informs the clinical work, that informs the policy, I really feel like that's something that we just have to deal with.
That's a very timely, it's a very timely comment. Very timely comment.
I just said,
Put on the checkbook.
I just have to say amen to everything she said. Amen. And want to add to that, I also consult with the FDA, and one of the findings that we made recently is that if you look at clinical trials, African Americans are greatly underrepresented in antidepressant trials. We just saw an N. On the other hand, we're overrepresented in schizophrenia trials. I guess that would be a whole discussion of why that is. But it's very clear that this is a gap that has to be closed. The other point, and I just wanted to again agree with my colleague, folks take the medicines, they work. Why don't they take the medicine? Because because they're not in the trials, the medication is not often at the pharmacokinetics that may agree with us. The doses that are sometimes given are just wrong. That work is just beginning to be appreciated. The other point is, and I think it's very important in terms of suicide, is that most of the antidepressants weren't developed to address problems like suicide. They usually take a week to 2 weeks to work. There are two agents that just came out that work very, very quickly. One in terms of a postpartum depression, the other one in terms that's designed for a meat action, a ketamine derivative. The ketamine derivative is going to be very restricted. You have to have your institute has to be approved. The providers have to be approved. Translation, you're not going to see it in many clinics in our communities. The other agent, $600 a pill, is going to be very unpopular in our communities. So we got some technologies that's developing that's going to be useful for us, but they aren't going to be available. And then, I think any good provider knows you cannot give these medicines in isolation without recognizing the importance of psychosocial variables, social determinants, and others. Else it don't work. I've done multiple studies that have been impressed at how when I look in the controlled settings at NIH, we get wonderful results. So in the drug company labs, but when we look at the real world, the drugs don't seem to work. Is it a problem with the drugs? No, it's a problem of understanding how these drugs work. And we cannot separate the biological factors with some of these social determinant factors as well. And then I just want to emphasize the point that you're hinting at, and I just come out bluntly. A lot of our young people, especially African Americans, are not getting the appropriate medication. They're not getting antidepressants. They have some of the antipsychotics they're promoting as antidepressants. Lo and behold, they quiet folks down, but they're still depressed. So we got to make sure that we have folks getting the appropriate, if they want to get medication, get ones that are targeted and that's evidence-based. Too many of our mental health clinics, too many of our correctional systems, the way in which treatment is provided is not evidence-based.
Thank you, Dr. Lawson. Let me just interrupt you 1 second because I have to leave. And Representative Cleaver is going to carry on. I'm interested in the discussion about impulse and no heads up. I'm interested in knowing some of the community groups and organizations that are doing specific evidence-based work. And I'm interested in trying to pull together some kind of an inventory of what exists that is working. Because it seems to me that a big issue here for us is why are we not funding it enough to be helpful enough to our communities? And I apologize, but I need to go mark up this bill because I know we're putting more money in research, and so we need to make sure we get some of it.
Let me just, there would be no apology necessary, but the speakers put me on a committee called the Congressional Modernization Committee. Every 40 years or so, whoever the speaker is will appoint a committee and they begin to make adjustments to modernize things. And one of the things that we're working on in this committee is to avoid what just happened. Because in Congress, nobody respect, and it's not a matter of respect, people just schedule things, and so my 95-year-old father is watching C-SPAN, and he looks at the committee hearing, and there are 3 people in there, and people, those people getting paid. Where are they? Well, they,
We gotta be 5 people.
yeah, you gotta, and I don't think the public, there are 25 committee hearings going on, and some of us may be on 2 or 3 committees. So you spend a little time in one committee, you run to the next committee, you run to the next committee, and they call votes in the middle of all of that. So there's no such thing as lunchtime, there's no such thing as, we don't call anything because this meeting is being held. Everybody just goes and when they call a meeting, they call a meeting. So I don't know anybody who's not familiar with the David is, if you're not familiar with the way the Hill operates, I don't know anybody think that, people are getting ready to go take a nap or, eat some bonbons, watch TV. This is just apologetic.
You're speaking for everyone.
No, there may be some nap taking, but none of the folk here. So, one of you have two questions next.
I did, and I'm one of those people that has to go run as well. So it'll be one member committee. So thank you all for really being here and having this conversation. I echo the words of Chairwoman Karen Bass as she spoke earlier at the press conference. It's really sad that we're having a conversation about Black youth suicide. This shouldn't be an issue that we need to commission a task force to address, but here we are. As a mother of a beautiful young boy who is just entering his adolescence, I am concerned. And I know a lot of parents are as we really navigate this new world. I was wondering if you have any advice, Dr. Breland-Noble, to help reverse this trend. What can parents do? Is there any research-based advice that you could provide for a lot of parents like myself who might be panicked at the moment?
Of course, thank you so much for the question. I really appreciate it, Representative. And I think that all of my colleagues can speak to this issue as well, and I'm happy to start. And what I share with all parents is we all have to start with being calm ourselves, right? So I do a lot of public speaking, and when I go out and talk to parents, particularly Black parents and parents of children of color, what I say to them is, they're always watching us. The kids are always watching us. And so I think the best approaches are those that are culturally informed, that recognize how Black households, whether those are Black African, African American, Black Caribbean, or Black Latino households, that we have a hierarchy in our households. And it's not, we're all best friends, right? They're the parents and then they're the children. And so what I share with parents is it's important that we maintain and take care of our own mental health. To me, that's the biggie. Because if we model it for our young people, I think they follow in our footsteps. So that's one. I think secondly, any program that is designed to support and uplift Black people, Black youth, youth of color, has to focus on what the real isms are that our young people are dealing with, right? So our young Black people and people of color are dealing with homophobia, transphobia, sexism, racism, right? When I was a kid, we didn't talk about the fact that Black kids have to deal with racism. My colleagues have all shared statistics about the differential impacts of suspensions or discipline, or how young adults are diagnosed, whether when they have the symptoms associated with depression or get a psychotic disorder diagnosis, right? So how people look at us. And so what I also share with families and with parents is that we have to be aware of what these isms are that are impacting us and our young people. And then I think additionally, it's really important for parents to understand and identify and recognize culturally relevant signs and symptoms of depression. For our young people, depression does not always look like a droopy face with crying eyes. Sometimes depression looks angry. Sometimes depression looks assertive. And for me, I think it is adaptive for our kids, because what happens to kids who are droopy and pitiful? You become a target. But if you're assertive and aggressive, you're pushing people away, nobody's gonna lie to you. Meanwhile, you're hurting. And we as adults don't always interpret those behaviors, that push away behavior, in the best ways. And then finally, what I would say is this: what I tell all my young people, and what I tell adults too, is I hope that we can get away from this language of people did something to me because I am fill in the blank. That was the blame on me. They didn't do that to me because I'm Black. They did that to me because they're racist, or because they're sexist, or because they're homophobic. And sometimes just having that shift in language to teach our young person, they didn't treat you like that because of who you are. They treat you like that because of how they interpret who you are and the relief that I see on these kids' faces. And so I think for me, it is really educating in a community fashion, educating the parents so the parents can be the conduit to educating the children, and then just helping parents take care of themselves. So I hope that answers the question directly, but I'll yield.
If I might, can I double down on that at the risk of being dignity, and it's really to highlight the importance of being completely honest and telling the truth, including naming things like white supremacy and anti-Blackness, but also listening to, I call them babies, right? Listening to our babies. And I think too often we don't listen to understand and acknowledge that they sometimes face challenges on the way to and from school that would break the average adult. And that's difficult, right? Because it invites us to sit in the reality that there's still so much work to be done, and that sometimes the systems that we are fighting to change work exactly as they are designed to work. And so I think naming things as we're doing in this moment is really important, and helping kids to appreciate that there's nothing wrong with them, they're not crazy, they're not imperfect. I think in this moment, the thing that I want most of this world is to say to Nigel, right, I wish that you could experience falling in love and finding friends that will affirm the most important parts of you. And too often, especially in the spaces that our kids are forced to move through, we don't ask them those questions. We say what's wrong with you rather than saying what's wrong. And so I don't want to fail to acknowledge the simplicity, but the importance of us listening to young people, asking them what they're doing and what they need and how we can be supportive, but also being willing to tell the truth.
If I could just add to that, we actually did a study on this very question with Black caregivers and adolescents, and we wanted to understand how it is they talk to each other about depression symptoms and that sort of thing. One of the things we were struck by with the kids, and the caregivers weren't even aware of this, so the kids said that when they're depressed, they oftentimes go into a recluse sort of mode, and they want their family members, those who love them, to bring out of them what's happening. So they're not readily going to advance that something is going on. And as my colleague just said, it's not rocket science. It's really easy. in terms of developing that rapport with our kids, giving them the opportunity to express their feelings, and talk about the challenges or things that are happening in their lives, and opening up that communication around those particular kinds of emotional or mental health struggles that, again, the kids are going to be reticent to talk about that. But if we open the door and provide that opportunity for them to express what's really happening, it seems to make the difference.
I just wanted to add to that, as a mom of 3 young adults and then grandmother of 2, 6 and 1, my joys. I call my children the Molock jewels. The research suggests that particularly for elementary school age children, one of the number one predictors of mental health, any kind of mental health outcome you can think of, is parental monitoring. So when my kids were little, I would say to them, if I don't know where you are, you're always in the wrong place. Now really, if I can't see you in the store wherever we were, if I don't know where you are, when they got cell phones when they were in high school, if you don't answer your phone, I used to do this myself, I would cut his phone off. Now he would say, Mom, I said, oh, now you can call me back. So part of that is, in our fellowship community, we say the ministry of presence is very important. It's so important. I think as parents sometimes we get real caught up in our busyness and also overscheduling our children. So from our perspective as parents, we're like, we're with you all the time. We're taking you to soccer, taking you to basketball, we're taking you to football. But if you ask the kids how much time do you spend with your parents, they'll say very little, because it's all activity based. It's very seldom parents spend individual one-on-one time with their kids. So when my kids were younger, and it's interesting, even though they're in their 20s now, they still ask for this. Each week they had a pal day with me, individually, where I took nothing special. Sometimes we went to the grocery store, whatever. But they had, particularly in the car, they had my undivided attention. And so that day, whatever that day was, we talked about whatever they wanted to talk about. It could be nothing, it could be something frivolous. The other thing I'm going to say as a college professor is parents need to chill out. There are lots of kids who are every year in my classes, my undergraduate classes, there's kids who should not be in school. They're not emotionally mature enough to be in school. They didn't want to go to school. They're not ready to go to school. And I particularly see this in young men. And I think as parents, we're so hyped up about what's going to happen if they don't go to school at 18. If they don't go to school at 18, they could go at 20. Nothing will happen. My youngest daughter is in Korea. She graduated 3 years ago. She's in Korea learning to speak Korean, and she's teaching young children who are Korean to speak English so she can become fluent in that language. And we have shared with her that's her dream. It's always been her dream. She doesn't have to go to graduate school right now because graduate school is not going anywhere. And so a lot of that, the chill out part, is really relax, give your kids some breathing room to kind of develop to who they're going to be, and let it be their dream and not your dream for them.
Did you want to add? I feel like you're the only one left.
Just want to make a point about, talk about the role of recognizing depression. I've been doing work the last couple of years focusing on manic depressive illness, bipolar disorder. And the idea is that this is a disorder characterized by euphoria, joy, and so forth. Where if you're poor, don't have any money, don't have any resources, folks are angry, irritable. And I have seen so many young people who really have bipolar disorder, but who show irritability. And unfortunately, they are just treated as angry kids. They end up in jail, they end up kicked out of school, they just go through a horrendous experience that fixes their lives for much of their life from then on. And I think part of it is just making teachers, parents, and others aware that just because the kid is seen to have a short fuse, is angry easy, doesn't mean that the kid is evil or bad. Many times they may have bipolar disorder. Instead, they end up getting, he's hyperactive, and then we give him a stimulant, and he shoots off like a Roman candle. Rather than seeing that he gets the appropriate attention, appropriate treatment, And that I think can make a huge difference in terms of many folks' lives.
Okay. The other question I wanted to see if you all can address, and you can each give a response to this, is that I was raised in a household where certain words were omitted, and I find that it allowed me to be a different person than many of my friends or many of the people in the society that I grew up in were. In the household that I grew up in, you didn't mention a girl or a boy, we were just kids. We didn't have hierarchy language in our household. I don't know if that worked out okay or not, but the ability to see yourself equal in every setting was embedded in me. I think, my dad's friends would probably say, right, like you didn't teach her to respect authority or whatever. But for me it worked out, and it's always surprising for people whenever I talk about my childhood and like, what do you mean? I grew up in Somalia, it's supposed to be impressive or whatever. But that's how my household was, and it was often confusing when I went outside and people talk differently. And so in my household, there are certain words we don't use, and certain ways we don't speak about one another. And my children are now clever enough to catch whenever I'm slipping. I said to my son the other day, don't aggressively talk to your sister that way. And he said, you said we're not supposed to use aggressive to describe black boys. So there are those, so I guess my question is, what are, right, some words that might contribute really to the damage to the mental health of many of our youth that we use to describe them? Is one, what are some words that we can say as a society maybe we shouldn't use? And then second piece is that I toured one of the community health centers in my district for Recess Week, and they used to have an intake center for adolescents, and they now changed it to the Community Connect Center. And I said, why was the shift made? And they said, well, a lot of the young people, especially this is in the heart of the black community in my district. They said the reason that we changed that a lot of people associated that with jail and prisons, and so nobody would show up. And the idea of standing in line for the intake, right, was also impacting their mental health. And so what are some of those kind of shifts that we could make in some of our healthcare centers to invite more community members to seek the assistance that they might need in getting the wellness treatments that they need?
So I think the two words,
And then I promise that's it.
I appreciate the questions and the insight. It makes me think of a whole lot of things, but I'll be brief. The two things that immediately come to mind is words that we try very hard not to use in my household and that I share with other people. We don't say crazy. We don't call people crazy. And that's sort of a given. I think any one of us would have said that right off the bat, because it has certain connotations. And I think being black, I remember one of our research studies, I always tell people this story. There was a sister and we were talking about stigma, what keeps people out of care. And the sister said, I'm already black, I'm already a woman, I do not also need to be crazy. Right? And so the idea is that I have these layers, right? Talk about my colleague Mr. John talking about intersectionality. I have these layers of identity. And every layer you add in this society, it pushes me further and further out to the margins. I don't choose to go out to the margins, it pushes me there.
Before you continue, I just wanted to say, in the Somali language, there is no other word to describe anyone who's having a mental health episode. That is the only word we have. And so this is, right, like a lot of the work that needs to get done in many of our communities is also developing the language that we need to use. But continue.
Absolutely, and I think what you're speaking to is part of what I think we all try to do, which is think about under the umbrella of Black, the differences. And so what you shared with your experience growing up in the household that you grew up in, I think is important and it's valuable. I would say that as an African American woman born and raised here, like if I grew up in Jamaica or if I grew up in a country that was all, I go to Jamaica all the time, I love it. Because everybody looks like me. Right? It's so Black, like everybody looks like me. And so I feel like a fish in water. Like I can just sort of swim. I don't have to identify myself or do anything. I think there's something unique about what it means to be Black here. And that it's important that in the household that you shared, you have a language that resonates, and at the same time, as Mr. John says, once you go out of the house, you're honest with kids about this is what you're going to encounter. And a lot of my colleagues do work on what we call racial socialization, teaching them how to be Black out in the world, which I think differs if your country is all Black or if your country is multiracial like ours. So bad and great, oh, the other one was bad. I tell them, don't call kids bad, right? You say somebody has bad behavior, because bad, if I say you are bad, I think that's how a child is that if I can't change that. If I have bad behavior, that's temporary. That's just I'm engaged in bad stuff now. In 5 minutes, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna have good behavior. So those are the two biggies for me, crazy and bad. And it, as you shared, help me raise awareness again about what these labels do to people. I think is very important. And then I forgot the second question, so I'm yield.
Can I offer I want to offer another way to think about entering into this kind of a discourse. And I think it appropriate that you mentioned Jamaica, a place that I used to love and enjoy drawing respite from, but as a same-gender loving Black man, and it's not a space that I can go to. And so I even want to I want us to think about the importance of asset-based language, acknowledging, as you so eloquently mentioned, that words matter and there's power and precision, and how powerful it is for us to invite people to give us the language that they want us to use. And so this just came up for us. The National Black Justice Coalition provides cultural competency training to historically Black colleges and universities, acknowledging how important HBCUs are, not only in doing the disproportionate work of providing post-secondary credentials, but also in shaping the culture, right? Being shout out to Beyonce and Homecoming for that. But there was a health provider who came to one of our cultural competency trainings that she said that when a student walked into the health center, that the student looked masculine, so this person referred to the student as he. The student turned around and walked right out those doors. We don't know what challenges, our problems, our resources that student was coming to seek, but we know that that student did not get served, in part because they weren't seen. And so rather than doing the reflexive thing that we are often trained to do, right, psychologically, we are trained to assess gender first and then move from there. We should invite people to offer up what is colloquially in white spaces called preferred gender pronouns, but should just be that which you want me to call you, right? The second thing that I want to highlight is how even phrases like problem child become problematic in particular spaces, right? There's no such thing as problem kids. Kids often label problem children are the most sensitive in telling us that the environments that they're in are toxic. But the last word I want to spend some time on is the word gay. All of the babies that I told stories about, with the exception of Mackenzie, were bullied and were called gay. It is a term that is used as a white political identifier that often in Black communities is the one thing you know to say when you want to fight. And if you notice, I use throughout my entire remarks, LGBTQ is same gender loving. Same gender loving is a term created by a Black man from Inglewood, California, named Cleo Monago, and it was created to allow those of us who also have same gender loving identities, but who are Black and love our Africanness to be able to claim it. And so the point I'm trying to make is that young people are really savvy in creating language to communicate to us that the binaries that we otherwise find comfort in just don't work. Young people now are using things like z's, them, theirs as their pronouns just to say he and she don't work and we're not going to allow you to force us in them. And so allowing young people to create language, inviting them to share with us a language that we should use, and doing the work to let go of the language we know that has been designed to destroy parts of us is so critically important in this work.
I think your question is such a great one. It resonates with me as a mom, grandmother, researcher, pastor. And I think one of my approaches has been not just to talk to my kids about what language not to use, but to affirm things. So each of my kids had a theme song. And ad nauseum, I would send it to them, sing it to them on the way to school. I still have an acronym I use for them. I love you to infinity and back, which I text to them every day. And that was because primarily, particularly when, my oldest two children are adopted, and I remember thinking to myself that every day they were going to have to go into the world that would hate them, just by the way they looked. And I remember my oldest daughter was about 3 or 4. We were in a mall, and she saw this man, and she thought the man was like the guy that was Farmer Brown on one of the TV shows. So she just saw a man overall, she ran to him, she's like, Farmer Brown, Farmer Brown. And we were laughing, and then when we looked at the man's face, he was looking at her like she was repulsive. And I remember telling my husband, go get her, but remember thinking, she's a baby, and how could you hate a baby? And so that's why those affirmations are really important, because I can't always control how the world will respond to them, but I can try to buffer them from some of that. And I think your second question about the community, what I loved about that is they used languaging, back to what you were saying, that would make people feel invited and welcome, as opposed to a mental health clinic. So it kind of goes with what we were talking about earlier about the stigma, then change the name. Particularly ask kids, what kind of language or what kind of name would make you feel welcome and invited, that would not be off-putting, would not be another label that we would place in them. The other thing that I've taught my kids, no epithets, racial, whether they're around sexual orientation, expression, none. No B words, no F words, no N words. I know this is generational, and I'm probably showing my age, I'm 62, but for me, those are things that were created by other people to demean us. And so my kids would get punished if they use those words. They've never heard us use those words in our home. I grew up in a home where, probably very much like yours, it's very different, but where equality was really important. I went to an all-girl high school, so I didn't know until I was in college that people thought girls couldn't do math. I was like, really? Because I had never heard that before. And so the environment that we raise our children in is really important, but being really affirming, because the world is going to tell your children all kinds of different messages than who they really were created to be.
I'll just add real quick that historically, Black children have been deemed to be bad, right? In schools, even in our homes, sometimes we say don't be bad. In schools, they have been overemphasized as being bad. And to me, that's connected to implicit bias. And the reason why we see that for Black kids, they are over-suspended and over-expelled from schools. And I'm actually calling for us to do away with suspensions and expulsions. I know that's a radical concept, but too many Black kids are just, I'm sorry, but it's upsetting to me that so many kids, Black kids, are suspended because they're bad. And therein lies the school to prison pipeline, because obviously when they're not in schools, they're up to the devices of the community. So that's something that really resonates with me as it's important that we need to do away with this notion of being bad and what's connected to that in terms of our implicit biases and the fact that Black kids are over-suspended. And to your second point, we actually have a program at McSilver called a Step Up program. It's a program that focuses on prevention of high school dropout for kids. But it's a prevention program that doesn't use mental health symptomatology to describe the kids' participation in the program. It more so focuses on assets. And really strengthening the assets of kids, both through one-to-one mentoring and in group mentoring format. And what I will say is that our graduation rates, because we work with mostly kids of color, Black and brown, are phenomenal, like double digits higher than the average kids in New York City public high schools. And so we need more programs like that. It's led by social workers, and oftentimes social workers in schools may not have the cadre of strategies and other mental health providers really to do sort of like evidence-informed or evidence-based work, but it's a model that can be replicated, and we see really great results. I think in large part because we don't refer to it as a mental health treatment group, but one that focuses on the kids' access.
If I could name one more program that Michael and I, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that one of the points you made was quite interesting, showing my age. Because I'm past 70. But I distinctly remember growing up, being taught about whether or not somebody called you black, you were considered, you're supposed to fight them. Of having the wrong kind of hair and so forth. And what raised me is the whole question about physical features and their role in terms of our community. Even though, and today you brought the point of implicit bias, even though we've done quite a bit to emphasize our positive Afrocentric features, I distinctly remember the changes that occurred in terms of selection of dolls from Kenneth Clark's work when folks refused to take the black doll, all the way to the 70s when we liked the black doll, and then seeing a reversal again, which the blonde white doll has become attractive again. And I think the larger context is not just the family, but beyond the family, that through our music, through our culture, that we have to play a role. I try to keep certain music out the house that failed dramatically because we have so many ways in which we now communicate thanks to modern technology. We may not be able to keep the information out, but we can help to work for our young people to interpret what it actually means. We need to work with them in terms of helping them understand that the stuff on the internet is not always true. To educate them that the information that they get may not be accurate, and try to put it in context. For me, at least, even my son is now 30, and we still have the time to talk about whether or not the information he's getting on the internet really does reflect how black people should be appearing. So I think we need to do more programs in our communities to educate people, not just what's happening in terms of the family, but in terms of how to understand and interpret information. And I'm a big fan of talk radio, and I was just listening to a big debate going on about whether or not we should take a measles vaccine. And what I was impressed at was that the lack of the knowledge and health information that many of our community have, and how it can be extremely important in terms of the way in which we develop health care.
I appreciate that. I just wanted to introduce two additional things into the record. And Michael and I both serve on First Lady of New York, Charlene McCrae's Brother and Sister Thrive initiative, which are focused on mental health in the African communities or throughout the diaspora. And two things that have been referenced, but I don't know if they've been explicitly named, is the role of trauma. And so earlier we talked about PTSD, but I wanted to introduce the foundational teachings of Jordan McGrew and post-traumatic slave disorder, and really highlight how in schools we don't have conversations about the ways in which children are genetically disposed to trauma. In particular, black children are children of the descendants of enslaved Africans. And so there's a lot more work to be done both to understand trauma and to support first responders in identifying and responding to trauma. The second thing, again, this has been referenced by almost everybody, is the challenges associated with toxic masculinity in black communities. And so how it is that our institutions, whether they be schools, our faith communities, historically black institutions, contribute to problems associated with toxic masculine culture, and how that affects black people, boys in particular, is also something that needs further discussion.
Let me, yeah, go ahead, please.
No, I'm just going to make one quick point. That is that we talked about PTSD, and we talked about depression and so forth. I've recently discovered that before 1990, autism did not exist in D.C. And then discovered that went back to my own childhood. I said, wait a minute, autism didn't exist in our community, but it did. We said that the kids were retarded, that they were attached is a term that was used, that it was something that was considered abhorrent, but also basis for putting people in institutions. I just unfortunately dealt with a parent whose kid was diagnosed as autistic at 16 years old. The rest of the time, he had been considered retarded. He was always always considered bad, and was on heavy doses of inappropriate medication. So that's an issue that I think we really need to communicate to our community. These are these kinds of problems that if we don't address early, can lead to a lifetime of dysfunction.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Let me thank all of you for being here, as well as those who have been here and are collecting very valuable information. Bonnie Watson Coleman was one of the best things out of Congress. She came in and when she has an interest in something, she goes to whatever lengths are required. And so I appreciate her, and I'm sure you do as well. You may have answered my one question. I've just been soaking up the information that you've given. I grew up in public housing, and we used to laugh as silly kids because we used to say black people don't commit suicide. In fact, I never heard it. When I was a kid, we said that's what white folk do. We don't do that. And I frankly didn't know anything about it. I mean, it didn't. I mean, you read about it in the paper and so forth. I remember in our history class we were talking about the stock market crash and the suicides. And so I tried to find a black suicide rate. Now, I know that a black person killed themselves because they lost their money. Because most black people didn't have any. And if they lost $39, they weren't about to commit suicide. So that's how we grew up. It doesn't impact us. And I didn't know anybody who committed suicide. Now you may have answered my question because I haven't not been able to find suicide rates for African Americans in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. So yeah. So we don't know what I mean. But if you ask people around the United States, and if they are baby boomers in my age group, they're going to tell you we don't know about anything. So I don't know what was going on. Either there were very few, or if there were a lot, then they were camouflaged into something else. Gary Emanuel Cleaver, my first cousin, he's in Los Angeles. He's singing in the choir, First AME Church, the men's choir. So the president of the choir goes to the pastor and says, Pastor, this is 1986. Pastor Cleaver's got to get out of the choir because he has AIDS, and other men are going to quit because they want to catch it. So Gary goes into a vacant house and stays there, writing us notes, just sitting around waiting to die. So as you were talking, that's a Gary, that may have been a form of suicide. But nonetheless, it's now on our radar, and I'm glad that we have an intelligentsia like you who can help us work our way through this. So thank you very much, and thank you very much, and God bless you.
Just for the record, the members have to go. We want to thank all the audience that came here today, especially there's some members of Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman's community in her district that came. I want to thank the young people that came from Isles that came for this. We'd ask that the members of the Taskforce stick around just to answer some questions informally. But as you know, this is a James G. I work as Bonnie Watson Coleman's Chief of Staff, and we wanted to make sure we did this today, despite the fact that members have to leave and move around because the legislative schedule is so crazy that we wouldn't be able to do this at any other time. We also wanted, for the record, for people who are on the panel to give us just a closing remark about a closing remark about your role on the task force and on the working group. I'm sorry, and what you envision for the working group. We have one member of the task force who will join us now. The Congresswoman from Massachusetts, Ms. Ayanna Pressley.
So I'm moving slowly, my lips have been compromised, but my voice is strong as ever. And it's my honor to join you to lend my voice enthusiastically, affirmatively in support of this measure introduced by my sister, Bonnie Watson Coleman. I think it is indicative of something that I firmly believe, and that is that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. This task force is evidence of the people closest to the pain, speaking up, amplifying your voices, sharing your lived experiences and your pain. And in doing that, I do believe we are going to save lives. And so I'm delighted to be a founding member of this caucus. Again, I thank Congresswoman Watson Coleman for her leadership. I'm new to Congress, but not new to this issue. In my tenure on the Boston City Council for 8 years, I had chaired what is ostensibly the Public Health Committee, and worked to change the definition of that committee to include trauma in the work of this committee, because I do believe that it is choking at the promise of families and communities. And so I just want to lead with this. My focus in the trauma space has been specifically on the barrier that it is to learning. Certainly, we care about the wholeness and the wellness, the whole development of our children, but they're spending 70% of their time at school, and when they cross that threshold, they are carrying with them the trauma of marginalization, of oppression, of poverty, of displacement, of experience of homelessness, exposure to violence in all its forms. And no matter how rigorous and dedicated we are in supporting the professional development, the diversifying of our teachers, upgrading our school facilities, pushing for rigor, that if a child does not have a readiness to learn, it really doesn't matter. And so all student achievement and ultimately the contribution of that child is about their wellness. And so in my brief tenure here, 100 plus days on the Congress, I've been continuing in the work that I started on the council, and I see some of my comrades in that work from my district in the room today. But I've been advocating for federal investment in school-based health centers, and also for socio-emotional wellness supports, school nurses, social workers, guidance counselors, and the like. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak to that, and if we think that would support the work of this task force and the work that you all do every day.
Also, Congresswoman, thank you so much. Thank you for your work. The point of schools resonates with me. I said earlier in my comments that we know schools are the largest provider of mental health services to schools, to kids. Unfortunately, the reality still remains that while schools are providing most of the mental health services to kids, kids of color, Black kids, Latino kids are not accessing mental health treatment, particularly for depression and anxiety. We definitely need more school-based health centers with a focus on mental health. We need the provision of resources to train providers to be able to deliver evidence-based treatments that we know exist, but oftentimes do not find their way to impoverished communities that are often kids are traumatized from living in those settings. And so we definitely applaud your work in that area, and we as a task force or as a working group along with the task force will be coming up with specific recommendations about evidence-based models that we know work, that just needs that extra push of support to be available to kids in schools. I think.
So I think the one thing I would add, again, thank you for your work and thank you for your comments. I think we can build it so we can add these resources to schools. I think as my colleague Dr. Lindsey shared, we also have to add with that, it's not more, we also have to have conduits to that care. So if we don't reduce the stigma that's associated with seeking mental health support, the counselor can be in the school, the psychiatrist or the psychologist can be in the school, but you're still not gonna have a pipeline to get that kid in that person's chair. And I think for kids of color, Black kids and Latinx kids in particular, that's a huge issue. So I think part of how we address that, as you shared, we add resources to the schools. We also have to add mechanisms that work, and evidence-based that is culturally relevant, right? That's the key. We have a lot of evidence. Whether or not it's useful for us, people who look like us, is another question. So I think increasing, I've said this a couple of times today, so forgive me, increasing the resources available to scientists who can create the mechanisms that are going to work to get kids in those chairs, the theoretical chairs of the counselors, the psychologists, the psychiatrists, the social workers. I feel like that's key. And if we're not able to create those mechanisms, we call that treatment engagement. How do we engage people in the process? If we can find culturally relevant ways to engage people, more people can make use of the resources that you're going to ensure gets put into those schools.
Okay, a couple of other things, if I might, I just want to pick up on this. So, three things. So, you know, the challenge in folks that are culturally competent and have those, what are we doing about the feeder in the pipeline for psychologists that have shared racial, ethnic, and cultural experiences? So what do we do about that pipeline? The other is, I just want to name a group specifically that I think our community is still struggling with homophobia, does not name. And we know that LGBTQ youth are most vulnerable to depression, and so the overlay of race on top of that. And then finally, the destinies and the freedoms and the health and wellness of our girls and boys are tied. And I appreciate you're using the word, it's not or, it's and. You know, because I think we get into this like, are we our brother's keeper or our sister's keeper? And then, you know, the more you look up the data points on one side, and someone comes back with more sobering data on the other side. And this is not the oppression Olympics. There is no hierarchy of hurt, and all of these destinies are tied. So how do we ensure gender competency, racial, ethnic, and cultural competency, and how do we get at the overlay of this triple vulnerable youth demographic of LGBTQ youth of color?
I will allow my colleagues here to speak to two of those three issues that you raised. The one thing that resonates with me is, as you said earlier, the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power. And so when we think about the pipeline, a lot of where we focus is on the early stages of the pipeline, which is critical. We have to have new people coming into the pipeline. I think we also, I know we also have to deal with what happens to people. I call it the greasy pipeline. Because you don't slip out, people push you out.
Retention.
Yes, so and so keeping people in throughout the career course is vital. So what are we doing to support mid-career? We're working in these hostile environments where people don't value what we're here for today, who are actually antagonistic toward it and angry about the fact that we would censor Black and brown youth and say we need to know how to help these kids with these issues. So for me, it really is that, keeping our young people in the pipeline through the life course so they get to be old like me and older, so that they can have enough of a career to be able to make a difference. And I'll yield to my colleagues on those other questions. Yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I believe my gracious colleagues are yielding to me because I lead the nation's only civil rights organization that is focused on the intersections of racial justice and LGBTQ equality. And so I won't read my statement. Would love to share it with you so you have it in its entirety. But all of my remarks were centered on that which you just described, and I talked about the stories of Nigel Shelby, Jamel Miles, and Carl, a baby who died by suicide in the state of Massachusetts. The thing that concerns me most, as it relates specifically to this, is that I think that we are being too gentle in identifying band-aids to a solution that is much more deep than finding psychologists that are culturally competent. I am, specifically as it relates to my doctoral research, interested in how schools are often, for Black babies, the source of trauma. There's a UCLA study that identified that in this current geopolitical environment, the racist, xenophobic, trans misogynoir rhetoric that comes out of the White House has increased anxieties in high schools throughout this country. More than 50% of students surveyed in K-12 schools throughout this country identify as anything other than strictly heterosexual. But we still sit in spaces where we ask kids to make sense of things that just can't be reconciled. An example is why we still celebrate Christopher Columbus Day. We also don't deal with the reality, and this is something that you referenced with regard to ensuring that psychologists are not only culturally competent, but understand intersectionality. Spend too little time talking about the reality that 98% of the workforce is comprised of white women, presumably heterosexual, or at least inclined to privilege that in their thinking. And the vast majority of kids in schools today are a global majority, and we still refer to them as a minority. And so unless and until we do a more thoughtful job of understanding how schools are part of what Black feminists refer to as a matrix of domination, they reflect the signs, symbols, and systems that are used to protect and preserve white privilege. Until we understand that and begin to then disentangle how it is that they worked as they're designed, they facilitate to Black kids, Black boys going to the prison pipeline, Black girls being pushed to the sex trafficking pipeline, and we haven't even acknowledged that there are kids that don't fit into either of those boxes. Gender non-conforming babies, trans babies, and the like. These are pretty heavy things for us to discuss, especially when too often the conversations around Black and brown kids are whether or not they can read and write. But to your point about understanding the importance of development and social emotional development in particular, we have to create spaces where teachers and families and communities and practitioners can have honest conversations about how we arrived at the place we are as a country and the work we need to do better together to move forward.
Thank you. And please, Lenny, you just make sure that we get his testimony. Everyone's, since I unfortunately missed it. Okay.
I just want to,
Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
I just want to respond to one point that mentioned in terms of the manpower issue. And unfortunately, it's worse than it need to be. I talked about 3 years. I trained as a psychologist, a psychiatrist, and as a scientist. And I've been impressed that in those 3 areas, which we think that the greatest need is to make a change, there has not been significant changes since the 1960s. Clinical psychologists who do internship in our program just aren't there. And so you can train all the clinical psychologists they won't be able to get the supervision and the clinical experience that's necessary to go on. Physicians, the number of African American males in medical school is about the same as it was in the 1960s. The number of residency training slots has not increased, so we can produce all the physicians you want. Those who want to be able to go into psychiatry, those who want to go to especially child psychiatry, the positions aren't there. And then when we look at the number of scientists, unfortunately, the number of scientists is still pretty close in terms of percentage-wise to what it was 20 years ago. And it's fairly limited now, and the research has shown that we are much less likely to get grants even though we may have the same kinds of quality work. And most importantly, especially as federal funding gets tighter, grant support goes to those areas that are considered the safest and more likely to be funded. These kinds of issues, high-risk issues, suicide is just not an area in which federal funding is going to be directed, because it's looked to be a low yield area.
Don't forget funding for kids who look like us.
Exactly.
But the other thing is, all day long we've been talking about the importance of doing things differently and doing it in more creative ways. You get dinged. All of us have been on grant reviews. And even though one of the scores is innovation, if you're too different, you won't. I mean, I've been trying to do a faith-based intervention for 15 years now, I think, and people don't understand church. So a grant application is 12 pages, single space. So I would need half of that space to explain how churches work. I get questions, which I realize they don't know church. So they'll say things to me like, your message, how can you dose, is it sufficiently dosed, which just means there's enough exposure, if I say we're going to do 4 sermons a year? Then I say, well, a sermon is designed to be persuasive once. But all people black church, we know that, right? Well, I only need one time because that's the goal of it. Was that coercive? So it's like challenging things that are culturally relevant to us and saying people are not going to change the way they do a sermon because that's the point of the sermon. And we can capture. So again, I love health fairs, but the people who need to come to the health fair aren't at the health fair. That's why we want to do sermons where we can make a big difference in the impact immediately. So I wanted to answer your other question, which was echoing what you said. I actually am doing a pilot study now, which is looking at, we're trying to develop HIV and suicide prevention programs in African American churches. So our biggest issue is what you so echoed and so eloquently pointed about, school's not safe. So we've been trying to recruit 50 young African American, which is called MSN, men who have sex with men or are sexually attracted to men. It has taken me 2 years to get 59 people. You know why? I cannot go to typical venues. I can't go to schools because kids they're not gonna come to the study because they don't feel safe. I cannot go to most health clinics because many of the children have not self-identified as a member of the LGBT community. So even though we don't consent them to keep them safe, they're scared that someone might see them take it. So we're literally on the street. And I'm proud of my team, but I mean really, part of this is like these are the kids who are most at risk. And we also do it that way because a lot of those kids are not in school. They don't go to school regularly because they're scared. I treated a young man once who told me he took an empty gun to school. And I said to him, he was being bullied, and I said to him, if you do this, you realize that they don't know your gun is empty, and so they're going to kill you. And he said, that's okay. I don't want to be a predator, but I'm tired of being a prey. Now, he's doing fine now, praise God, but I've never forgotten him. Or one time he told me, Dr. Molock, why are we doing all this CBT with me and my antidepressants? You need to change the school. I'm fine. And he was right. He was right. So I agree with our colleagues that these venues, school is a great place because you can capture a broader audience. But if we don't change the environment of the school, the kids aren't going to go to the clinic.
Yeah. Well, and I arrived late, and you all were supposed to have a hard stop at 5. I'm gonna say 2 things. I don't know if you've ever been in a room where they ask you that question, who's the person you would most like to have dinner with? All of y'all. Okay, so let me just say that. And then secondly, I know church, I get church, I need a church home in the area, so I'm gonna come check you out. But to your point about meeting people in the community and where they are, and I'm glad this isn't a one-off. You know, we're going to be doing this work together. So that we're getting prescriptive beyond Band-Aids, right, and going deep. So I look forward to that, and I welcome the challenge because we need to save these lives. But, because I do worry about our treating young people as if they're independent contractors. And so even if I could get all the investments that have the wraparound supports in the schools, they can go home and that is undone because of, intergenerational trauma. And those parents don't have the tools and are undiagnosed, and so we have a lot of work to do, but I am confident that we have the right people around the table. So again, I want to, as we adjourn, I want to thank Congresswoman Watson Coleman for her visionary leadership in initiating this task force, and I look forward to future conversations.